Welcome to the Simply Safe review. Today we're going to talk about the Yerkes-Dotson Law, simplified and applied to handgun shooters and trainers. Christy and I are going to try to provide some of these from time to time. In its simplest form, the Yerkes-Dotson Law really states that there's an optimal level of arousal for every task that a person performs. For our purposes, we're going to tend to use words like stress and anxiety in place of arousal. You actually require some level of anxiety for every task that you do. If you could actually get to absolute zero anxiety, you wouldn't be motivated to do anything. At zero stress, you would really be non-functional. You'd have a complete lack of motivation. You wouldn't do anything. So embrace some stress, just don't embrace more than you need to. At the other extreme, if you're stressed to your limits, you'll not function because the stress will make it impossible for you to concentrate or to command your body to do what you want it to do. Between these extremes, for every task you do, there is an optimal level of stress for performing that task as flawlessly as you are capable of performing it. And here's where it gets really interesting. For simple tasks, the optimal stress level is higher on the scale. Otherwise, you won't do them well. With enough motivation, you'll be able to generate enough stress to do the task that you otherwise wouldn't do. For example, let's say that you wanted to knit a sweater for your nephew and you find that it's very easy to do, but you're just not getting to it. You have a stress level that's too low for that task. To increase the stress level to the optimum level for that task, you might need to dial up the stress. You might do that by setting deadlines for yourself or making yourself accountable to someone. You might decide to create a countdown calendar so you know how many days you have until Christmas. But somehow you're going to have to figure out how to dial up. You might even want to put a picture of your nephew up so you can think about how happy he's going to be when he gets his new sweater. But to engage in complex tasks, we need to remember that a lower level of stress is optimal for engaging in a complex task and doing it well. Too much stress interferes with critical thinking, fine motor skills, and concentration. So if you're a brain surgeon and you're experiencing stress that is higher than the optimal level for you to do your best work, you need to dial back the stress level. Maybe a vacation, marriage counseling, maybe a refresher course in brain surgery, or a golf course, or personal therapy would help. But something needs to happen because the work that you do is important and complex. So remember that the typical new shooter is engaging in a complex task and likely experiencing high levels of stress. That doesn't mean that the new shooter can't become a great shooter. It just means we need to become aware of what that student might need based upon the Yerkes-Dotson Law. Because both are changeable things, stress and complexity. So we need to figure out how to reset the dials to optimal levels for the specific individual we're trying to help. There really are things that we can do to change those dials. For example, taking a good class and becoming more familiar with our firearm will dial back both the stress and the complexity level. And after we've gotten training, regular practice, especially with a practiced friend who can watch and get feedback, and with the same gun that you plan to carry, you'll grow confidence. You're going to decrease your stress, and you're going to dial back the complexity even further. And as you continue to practice and to learn and to train, you'll discover that the stress imposed by shooting itself is going to decrease and become very manageable in less time than you might have expected at the beginning. And soon, safely loading and unloading your handgun, drawing, firing accurately, reholstering, all of these will become simple tasks. And as you add new skills, they too will approach the level of simple tasks as you continue to learn and practice what you learn. And don't forget that performing simple tasks requires more arousal, more stress than performing complex tasks. So retain the safe practices that you developed early and never compromise the rules of safety when you enter new comfort zones. And don't forget that becoming too comfortable can be dangerous. But you can overcome the danger by consistent practice and by taking steps to increase your stress while shooting. And never forget the safety rules. God forbid, but if you're ever involved in a violent encounter that requires the use of your handgun, you'll be grateful that you'll be engaging in what has become for you a simple task while experiencing high levels of stress. Now let's think about the stress imposed by the violent encounter, not by training and all of the kinds of things that happen at the range. It's going to be important to be able to dial back your experience of stress to a level that is as close as possible to optimal. To help us think about it, I want to just quickly review the levels of awareness developed by Jeff Cooper. You'll remember that white represents the state of being oblivious to what's going on around you. Yellow is for the state of being aware of your surroundings and alert while still more or less relaxed. Orange is for the state of being aware that there really is some kind of potential threat that you might have to deal with. And red is the state of actually needing to deal with the threat that is real and current. That's all we really want to say about Jeff Cooper's excellent contribution to the shooting community. But if it is new to you, you would do well to use your search engine and go learn more about it. We mentioned in the context of this discussion because other thoughtful people have made some useful suggestions regarding the connections between these levels of awareness and levels of stress that might tend to go with them. In trying to develop these ideas, we really stand on the shoulders of Jeff Cooper, David Grossman. You really should read his On Combat, and others as we develop them. But from Jeff Cooper's color code of levels of awareness, others have elaborated on the levels of stress that may accompany them. And they've carried forward the idea by adding conditions gray and black as the highest levels of stress. Even so, it's helpful to hold on to the distinction between levels of awareness and levels of arousal. So we can suggest that there are steps that you can take to decrease your stress without actually lowering your awareness. They're not the same thing, but they are related. So I want you to consider some truths that really do have to do with your general stress level and the reserves that you can hold on to until you actually need them. First of all, events do not directly cause your stress. What you think about events causes your response. You can develop habits of thought that create less stress or more stress. It's up to you. So I want to urge you to try to dial it back in general so that you can be ready when you need it. Because your thoughts are creating your stress, when you tell yourself that you're in the middle of a crisis, your body believes you, and you begin to experience exactly what you are imagining is true, even if it is not. So when you tell yourself the truth, you can save your emotional reserves until you really need them, and you can remain more relaxed in most situations every day. So the next time you have a flat tire during a rainstorm and in your mind you're labeling that event as an awful, terrible crisis, stop the thought. You're hurting yourself by the thought. Your flat tire is a relatively mild inconvenience and a slight discomfort compared to a real crisis. Make yourself make distinctions. Make it a habit to pay attention to the needless untruths you impose upon your body every day. Practice revising them to dial down the needless stress. Now I'm going to suggest some things that people in the handgun community may think of as liberal or religious, but they're really neither. You can learn to practice progressive muscle relaxation and mindfulness. Tactical breathing is another word for one of the things that you can do. Google for methods. You really can learn to relax your body at will, and it'll dial down the stress and help you when you need to use your reserves. And here are a few implications for handgun trainers. So if these ideas are meaningful to you, tailor your training to the needs of your students. A first-time student is typically attempting a complex task while experiencing high levels of stress. Calm, step-by-step, respectful instruction dials down the stress. Think of some other ways that you can work with your students individually. Of course, shouting, imposing speed demands, harsh critiques of performance, angry outbursts, they all dial up stress. The demands of training, when appropriately imposed, are better tools for dialing the stress up, and no one really learns from personal insults. So if it makes sense to you, use the insights of this law to choose the tools that'll help your students where they are. When stress is interfering with safe performance, dial it down. When low stress is dragging down performance, dial it up. There's always something to think about doing, but do it for reasons. At least try to figure out where your students are relative to their complexity level and stress. I hope this at least gives you a framework for doing what you're doing and for knowing why you're doing it. You could either be R. Lee Ermey or Bob Ross and make the choice for good reasons. But if you can't stand dialing it down for your students because of some fear that you'll be seen as soft, or if you thrive on the feeling of power that feeds your ego when you play tough guy, then you'll tend to meet your own needs, not those of your students. Let's call that the Yerkes half-wit law. Thanks for watching.